Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Poland, and I'm the CEO of Hartford Public Library. And I want to welcome you to our library, whether it's your first time or your 1,000th time here. And I want to also welcome you to the Center for Contemporary Culture, the room that you're in today. We host a wide variety of events like this one here throughout the year, and we encourage you to come back time and time again to visit us and to explore what a 21st century public library is about in the city. If you're here and you have a few minutes, you certainly can walk around, and we encourage you to do that. We are redefining here in Hartford, among other public libraries, urban public libraries in the country, what public libraries do. And for those of you who are familiar with the kind of work that public libraries are doing, it's not the same as the library that you and I might have remembered when we were children. It's not any longer about the nostalgia of the smell of musty books, but a new nostalgia about how public libraries reach out into their communities and ask the community what the community needs from them. No longer defining collections that librarians believe are important, but looking at developing collections and programs that are important to the communities we serve. So this program tonight is one of those, and we're delighted to be able to do that. Our efforts are not possible any longer without the support of many, many partners, and tonight marks the start of a collaboration that combines the fascinating ideas, resources, and conversations facilitated by the Connecticut Forum with deep educational and civic engagement that happens at a public library. The Connecticut Forum has been a leader in bringing relevant and important topics into discussion here in Hartford, and we anticipate many more exciting evenings like this one to come. Since its founding in 1992, the Connecticut Forum has brought hundreds of the world's most fascinating experts and celebrities to our city to participate in its unique brand of live, unscripted panel discussion at the Bushnell. Just as powerful and unique as Forum evenings are, the Forum's community outreach programs, including Connecticut Youth Forum, a voluntary high school youth program, serves 750 students in 35 schools, and it helps students connect and communicate across divides such as geography, race, sexual orientation, economics, and more. This is also a special evening for our moderator, Richard Sugarman, founding president of the Connecticut Forum, who is beginning a new chapter in his life of service. And I thought it was on Monday, but he tells me it's this week, as the first executive director of a new scholarship fund set to begin to distribute $3.8 million to Hartford students next year. It's called the Hartford Promise. And both as the leader of the library and a member of Hartford's Board of Education, we couldn't be happier to have the expertise of Richard Sugarman in the Hartford Promise. So here to moderate tonight's conversation is the founder of the Connecticut Forum and the new executive director of Hartford Promise, Richard Sugarman.
Thank you. That's the first time I've heard that. It's going to take a little while for that to sink in. What a good night. How are you guys? Everybody good? Great. We're going to have a fun night tonight. And I would just echo Matt's remarks. We're very excited at the Connecticut Forum to be in this partnership with Hartford Public Library. This is a wonderful asset for our community, and we love doing this together. It's been fun up to this point, and it's going to be fun tonight. And we will do a similar event following the next Connecticut Forum in May with David McCullough and Stacy Schiff. We'll do another extension evening here at the Hartford Public Library, and then hopefully continue into next year. So this is the start of this Forum extension series between Hartford Public Library and the Connecticut Forum. So glad you all are part of it. Remember this moment, right? So just a quick question. How many of you all were at the Connecticut Forum a couple of weeks ago at the Bushnell with Dinah Nyad and Cheryl Strayed? Many of you, most of you. Who was not there? So you all who were not there, you need to get with the people who were there and find out what a great night that was. It was really wonderful. We're going to show you, as part of tonight, we'll show you a couple of clips from that. So even though those of you who weren't there, you'll get a sense of it, okay? So we're going to do a few things tonight. Just give you a heads up. We're going to have presentations from our fabulous panelists who have had experiences, unmatched experiences. So they're each going to do a presentation and show you some of the wonderful things they've been and amazing things that they've done. And then we're going to have a conversation where we're going to talk with each other. We're going to chat. And then we're going to give you all a chance to ask questions. So be thinking about and preparing the questions that you want to ask the panelists. So this will be a full and fun night, okay? So let's get started. So the first panelist, the first presenter, she was a native of England. She's been here for 30 years. She is the coach, the field hockey coach at Trinity, and also, I think, assistant lacrosse coach at Trinity, and renowned for that. But she's traveled extensively throughout the world. Rock climbing, mountaineering. She's climbed, let me see, I will get some of these right, but I will get some of these wrong, so I'm sure I'll get corrected here. She's climbed Aconcagua. Twice. She's climbed Denali. I will not get this one right. Cotopaxi. Thank you. Chimborazo, Mont Blanc, Onondaga, and Mount Everest twice, summiting Mount Everest in 2006. And as I said, she's currently the field hockey coach and assistant lacrosse coach at Trinity. So please say hello to Ann Parmenter. Are we going to dim the lights a little bit?
It doesn't matter. Thank you, and I appreciate the invitation to speak with you this evening. I am used to speaking and doing a slideshow that's usually an hour long, so I've been told I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to keep it really short. I wanted to just share a couple of the images, Everest 2006, and I think for most of us that do things that are considered adventurous, it's an excuse to travel to places that otherwise we wouldn't go. And to see things and to appreciate people who've been there before. I had the opportunity to climb Everest from the north side, which is the Tibet side, and in 1922, 23, George Mallory and Andy Irving attempted Everest from this side, and then Tibet was closed to foreign travelers, and then the south side of Everest was then explored later. But something that was very sort of poignant to me after managing to summit, and we're looking at Everest right there in the distance with the summit ridge. This is the memorial to Mallory and Irving, and I think it was very important for me after sort of having a summit day where I had seen some fallen climbers to reflect on that, which is a very difficult thing to sort of get your mind around. You're really excited you've managed to stay on top of the world, but you've also seen somebody die in front of you, and you've passed corpses of people who've been there for about 10, 12 years on the mountain. You are undernourished, hungry, tired, ready to go home, and you're trying to deal with sort of elation and death in the same sort of couple of days. So I spent some time on my own after summiting, just being at this memorial and sort of contemplating how I was going to deal with that moving forward. And as I said, you know, I had a really small point-and-shoot camera, and there are times when you're passing just unbelievable, natural, beautiful things. This is one of my most favorite pictures that I took. You know, it's not a summit picture, it's this incredible ice sculpture as I was coming back down, and just trying to take some time to sort of appreciate the things that are around you, not only when you have expeditions like this, but in your everyday life. I think we tend to walk with our heads down and often looking at our phones nowadays, that I really had to actually stop on my way down and just go, yes, I did something that maybe it was cool, but wow, this is amazing. And so most of the trip, people talk about what do you do, how do you train, and Rahan and I were just talking about this. In 2004, when I went, some people here may have read the book High Crimes that our first expedition was based off of, I lost about 20 to 25 pounds, and that's an awful lot of weight when you're expending between 6,000 and 10,000 calories a day at this elevation, that I decided that I needed to take some food with me, and I actually made an old-style English Christmas cake. And I packed it, I wrapped it in foil, and carried it with me, and I wanted to prove to my mom that I actually really did make this Christmas cake. And I would slice up this cake because I was so sick of eating granola bars and power bars and sort of reconstituted food, that this is me eating a slice of Christmas cake, and it became one of the most popular foods on our day hikes. Was people were coming to me for a slice of Christmas cake. So as we get higher up the mountain, again, it's like taking the time to really reflect on the places and where you are. And, as we got higher, we were sharing that, an expedition like this takes about 2 months from the time you leave. I left on March 30th, and I got back on June 6th. But a lot of the time that you're there, in high-altitude mountaineering, we talk about hurry up, and then you wait. And you could spend 2, 3, 4, 5 days either waiting for the weather, waiting to feel better, going back down the mountain before you quickly have to get up and move again. And so we were constantly going back and forth between our camps, and then finally, when you get to a point where you're not going to go up and come back down again, you have about 5 days where you literally are just going up. And those are the 5 days that now it is summit or bust. And this is looking down on the camp at the top of the North Col, and we are now moving up. All the tents are tied down, strapped down. These are tents that are 4-season tents, supposed to withstand all kinds of weathers, and you routinely see these tents shredded on the mountain because of the weather that you can get on Everest. The conditions there, pretty typical. I climbed it from the north side, and Rohan climbed from the south, and it's very different kinds of terrain that you're dealing with. But the one thing, the mountain is so scoured with the wind that there is not a lot of snow. And so once you start going above Camp 2 and you're using oxygen, you have the crampons on, but there's not a lot of snow. And so tripping is a huge factor here, and oxygen mask, big boots, and crampons, you just kind of keep making it more and more difficult every single day as you become weaker. And so that's why the challenge is absolutely right there. You always see the pictures, and looking from the memorial that I was just at, looking from the tent, it's 17 miles to where the Mallory Memorial is, right down the Rombuk Glacier. And this is looking out of our tent at High Camp 3 at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The mountain in front of us is a mountain called Chauncey, and we are preparing now to rest and then leave our tent at about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night to go for our summit bid. And we're laying here pretending to be resting, but your heart rate is going at about 200 beats a minute from the elevation and the anxiety and wondering why the heck you're even here in the first place. But you're trying to get a little bit of rest before you set off. And most of the journey now is going to be very much single file. And, the question always arises when you come across a stranded climber. When you get to the elevation that we're at now, because we're above 27,500 feet, you're walking fixed rope. It's very difficult for you to walk, but it's impossible if a climber can't walk themselves to actually carry somebody down. There's just no room for two people to walk together or for you to try to carry somebody. We set off at night, and we were so fortunate that the night that we set off, we left camp May 24th at about 11 o'clock at night, and it was completely windless. By the time we made the summit ridge, which was much steeper than I had thought, I'm a rock climber, but I had no idea that it was going to be rock scrambling at midnight in crampons. But I was able to climb. That's me at 1 o'clock in the morning, no glasses on, no ski goggles, and I actually just have a really light pair of actual ski gloves, no liner. I'm not wearing the 8,000 meter mitts that the Sherpa is wearing because it was no wind. It was amazing. And this is the top of the Chinese ladder, or the second step, where George Mallory supposedly may have been able to climb, but probably fell from. There is now a ladder at this point. And on the north side, this is typically where there's a bottleneck occurs. But we were able to get through that. You know, the sunlight is coming up, and we're right on the border between Nepal and Tibet, looking down the Katjung face and 5,000 feet down into Tibet. And for me, one of the most emotional times, because we waited till a little bit later in the season, we turned, and about 40 meters in front, you look up, and suddenly from 2 months of looking up, there's no more in front of you. And I actually teared up. I started crying in my big oxygen mask, and I'm like, Anne, you've got to pull yourself together, because you're not there yet, and you still have to get down. So that's the other, you know, it really is halfway, but you can see the prayer flags. They're not even blowing in the breeze. We were really fortunate that of the 12 people that went on our expedition, there were 6 of us that were still healthy and well enough to continue, but the team we were with, all of the Sherpas were given an opportunity to summit. And so there were some Sherpas on our team that had never summited Everest, and so they wanted a Sherpa picture. And then when we got down, we all shared our pictures, and somebody said, well, that's not a Sherpa in the background. Who's that? And woohoo, yeah, I'm so used to being in sports teams. They're like, whoa, wait a minute, that's you, Anne. And so I snuck in on the picture. And obviously, and then when I showed my sister this picture, she's a nurse, and rather than that reaction, she's going, God, your lips are so blue. And it's because there's not a lot of oxygen. The thing for me was, sometimes when I look at these pictures myself, it's hard to put yourself back actually being there. And so we spent about 50 minutes sitting on the summit with my gloves off. I had a hot Gatorade Camelback inside my down suit, and I was able to eat jelly beans. That was about all I could stomach, but I really wanted to look around and look at the mountains that were right in our view. And this is a view of a mountain called Makalu, and far in the distance, about 200 miles, is Kanchenjunga. Both of these mountains are members of the 8,000 meter club, and there's just these incredible views. And so trying to take these in and put it into your mind to never forget was something that I was really very conscious of trying to do. But as I said, we took our pictures, and then you are very much aware of the fact that it is like hitting the 18-mile mark of the marathon, because now you do have to get down safely, and you have to come home. And I'd be happy to answer questions later in the presentation.
Thank you, Anne. That's, oh my gosh, she took us to Everest. Oh my gosh. You said at some point you looked and there was nothing else in front of you, right? Wow. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Anne. We'll have plenty of time to ask questions and share reactions. So our next panelist and presenter is a former Hartford Courant columnist. In fact, he was a very distinguished Hartford Courant columnist for 29 years, and an award-winning Hartford Courant columnist, and a beloved Hartford Courant columnist all that time. His focus was on nature, outdoors, recreation, the green movement, energy, natural sciences. He was nominated, I think, for 6 Pulitzers, won a Pulitzer. He's paddled most of New England's best-known rivers in a canoe or kayak, and once canoed the 410-mile-long Connecticut River from its source on the Canadian border south to Long Island Sound over a 5-week period that became a 17-part series of articles for the Hartford Courant. And Steve has taken us, who have been here in Connecticut, you've really been our source to the outdoors and our guide to the outdoors and all sorts of appreciation and love for the outdoors of Connecticut. So please join me in saying hello to Steve Grant.
Hello, and thank you for having me tonight. I'm sandwiched in between Anne and Rowan here, both of whom who have summited Mount Everest. So I want you to know that I've summited Bear Mountain in Salisbury. And I don't mean to make light at all of what they've done. Wow. That to summit Mount Everest, wow. I do the kind of things that I think a lot of us can do. And let me get a slide up here right off the bat. So, as Richard said in that most generous introduction, thank you, Richard. You know, I've done these things, most of them for the Hartford Current. The nice thing, when I canoed the Connecticut River for 5 weeks, I was being paid. So, and with all these other things. But the idea was to write about Connecticut and New England outdoor adventure. Is some of these adventures, and you're going to see the slides, they're actually pretty modest kind of things. They're things that many of us can do with a little conditioning. So we mentioned the Connecticut River. I did this 24 years ago now, and that's up in the headwaters, up in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. And here's a beautiful spot, again, in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. This is the beginnings of the Connecticut River up there. I've been fortunate over the years writing, for a newspaper and sometimes magazines, to have photographers working with me. And I actually took this photo myself, but many of the photos you're going to see in the next few minutes were taken by current staff photographers who are just excellent. This is in Hartford. I had been on the river for, 4 weeks, I guess, and I came into Hartford, and Riverfront Recapture had a big celebration. We all made remarks that day, and as you can see, I brought a little too much along in my canoe, so the portages were just agony. But that's my own fault, The people on Everest needed all the stuff that I had in my canoe. And I needed a Sherpa for sure. And this is at the finish. That's my wife and my children. And of course, my kids are fully grown now. It's so long. My daughter's married, has a 2-year-old and another one on the way. And my son is 28 years old. So time flies. Another thing I did just a couple years after the Connecticut River trip, I researched the route of the legendary old Leatherman. The old Leatherman used to walk a circuit basically between the Hudson River and the Connecticut River, a big loop. It was about 350 miles. So I figured out what his route was, and I walked it. He did it every 33 days. It turns out it took me 31 days. And I was walking about 12 miles a day. That's the route. And, as I came along, the old Saybrook Historical Society had a function for me. This happened, a half dozen times over the course of the month that I was out. And that's the grave site of the old Leatherman in Ossining, New York, right near where he died. Interestingly, the state archaeologist, just retired, Nick Bellantoni, exhumed that grave just a couple of years ago, and there's nothing in there. Very weird, because supposedly he was buried there. He died of cancer after 30 years of walking that route that I showed you. So anyway, that's the latest on that. And then in 1995, we at the Current put together a group hike of the whole Appalachian Trail, and we got 4 other newspapers to go in with us, and each of us had like a 450-mile section of of the Appalachian Trail. And so the Atlanta newspaper had the first big session, and blah, 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 and on we go. So this was the beginning. We all did the first 40 miles together in Georgia. It was late March, just 20 years ago this month, and it was a raw day. It was like 35 and rain, and it was like the next 4 days. So off we went. We get to Connecticut, and my daughter a couple of years older now, joins me for 5 days as we pass through Connecticut on the Appalachian Trail. And this is on the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, Mount Katahdin in Maine. Not Mount Everest, but still a pretty good mountain and a wonderful, wonderful hike. So that's me up there. That's called the Knife Edge. It's right near the summit. And here's our group. Again, we all of us involved in the series got together and we all did Mount Katahdin to finish the hike together. And in fact, over there on the right, in the greenish thing with his arm up on the right, that's Michael Kotis. And Michael was with Anne on her first trip to Mount Everest, where they almost made it to the top, but not quite, as I recall. But Michael was the photographer for many of these adventures that I did. That's Michael right there again, and me. A couple of years later, we circumnavigated Long Island Sound in sea kayaks. Again, that took a month. And all of these things now, I'm writing as I go. I have a laptop computer with me, and every day or every other day or every third day, I write a story and I send it to the Current and they throw it on the front page. So that's what I was doing with all these things. And again, in this case here, I wrote every other day on the Long Island Sound series, and we just talked about all the issues. When I came down the river, we talked about all the issues involving the Connecticut River. Appalachian Trail, we wrote about everything from dangers on the trail to intrusions on the trail, and it covered everything, I think. It came out as a book later on. And we did the same thing here with Long Island Sound. Crossing Long Island Sound from Long Island over to Groton, a rogue wave hits me, in I go, splash, and I have to manage to right my kayak in really stormy water in the race there. That's funny water, confused water. But at any rate, with Michael's help, I got back in the kayak. Here's Michael. This is right off Plum Island. Now, these were all trips of about a month long, but a lot of the stuff that I've done over the years, and especially for the last 10 years, are adventures that are a day, 2 days, 3 days. My daughter on the Bold Coast Trail in Maine, and that trail, I am amazed you don't see more people on it because it is absolutely fabulous. It is a wilderness trail. You have your choice of a 5-mile loop or a 10-mile loop. If you do the 10-mile loop, you get 5 miles of wilderness coastline. You're walking just at the top of that bluff all the way along for 5 miles. You don't see a house. You don't see anything. Once in a while, you see a passing ship out there. Total wilderness, unlike almost anything else you can see on the entire eastern seaboard. A magnificent hike that can be done in a day. That's me clowning around with my first yoga teacher. It's Robin Kirsch. She lives in Farmington. Terrific yoga teacher. And we are on Lion's Head on the Appalachian Trail in Salisbury on a beautiful fall day. There were about 30 of us who got together and just went up to Lion's Head that day for a fall foliage hike. That's just one day in the outdoors, but we had a grand old time. Don't look at how well I was doing that pose. And you know, I still spend time on the Connecticut River. This is me. This is right between Windsor and South Windsor, just paddling the river. This is a famous view of the Appalachian Trail in Salisbury. It's called Rand's View. And the trail comes along right like here, and you're looking out at the Berkshires. And I think one of the reasons, just like, you know, I was charmed by Anne's photo of that ice sculpture, because I think one of the reasons we paddle a kayak out in remote areas or hike or any of these things, it's not just the physical activity. It's not getting from here to there. It's what we see along the way. And Anne saw that fantastic ice sculpture and took the time to take a photo of it. And I like to do the same thing, whether I'm canoeing or kayaking or hiking or snowshoeing. I like to stop and smell the flowers, you know, so I'll take a picture. I took this picture of the pink lady slippers. That's on the Agnes Bowen Trail in Barkhamsted. If you want to see it, just go out there in late May and hike the Agnes Bowen Trail, and you'll see it. And, you know, again, this is a lovely little hike you can do in a half day in Hartland, Connecticut. Falls Brook Trail. To hike to this waterfall is all of about a mile, something like that, and it's beautiful. So I took that picture, and that's it. I look forward to our conversation, and I look forward to questions from you folks later.
Thank you, Steve. So let's see what I took away from there a lot, but stop along the way and check out the pink lady slippers. Huh? Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you, Steve. That's wonderful. We live in a great state. We live in a beautiful state, in a beautiful area, a beautiful part of the country. You just gotta take a step, right? Just put a paddle in the water, take a step. It's great, Steve. Thank you. So our next presenter is originally from Jamaica. He is the first African American to complete the 7 summits. So he was not satisfied. Everest was not enough. You know, the second one was not enough. 7 summits, which are the highest mountains on each of the 7 continents. I'll try to get these right. I will not get them right, but Everest is obviously one, and Aconcagua is another, and McKinley is another, which I always, when I look at photos of McKinley, and so I want to hear more about that in terms of that amazing thing. Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, Vinson, and I'm going to say Puncak Jaya, but Karsted's Pyramid is what it's known as. And combined, these 7 summits are 142,114 feet. Not 113, 114 feet. But also, Rowan is an adventurer and explorer and risk taker of another sort. He founded Freeman Companies, which is a civil engineering firm, shortly after he climbed Everest. And his career in civil engineering stems from his longstanding inquiry of economic development and urban design, which has led his thinking and led him to many large-scale projects, including, as I understand, the new, I want to say Dono project here in Hartford, which will be the new home. Part of it will be the new home of the Hartford, there you go, Hartford Yogurts. We already know that, right? So please say hello to an adventurer and explorer on many levels, Rowan Freeman.
So 15 years ago, I didn't realize there was a sport called mountaineering. I'm going to start by telling you a story. I grew up in Jamaica. When I was about 11, 12 years old, a cousin of mine came to visit during his winter break. The temperature got down to about 60 degrees, might have been higher. I remember one thing about that day. My friends, myself, everybody in my little village had every stitch of clothing we could find in our closet, and we refused to go outside because it was so cold. My cousin was walking around outside enjoying the weather in his shorts and his t-shirt. And we all looked at him as if he had 2 heads, and we're like, that guy is crazy. It's freezing out there. What is he doing? He's going to die. Fast forward about 20 years. I was sitting at my desk at work. I'd been in this country for quite a while. Hated winter, but I'm an outdoors guy. I grew up in the tropics. I need to be outside. I came to a crossroads in my life. I was either going to move to California, Jamaica, or Florida. Or the alternative is to try to enjoy winter. So I called up a friend of mine. I said, I have a great idea. I hope you could help me, because I don't really want to leave Connecticut. My family is here. My mom is here. My brothers are here. So let's go snowboarding for a week, because that's the only thing I knew about winter sports. I didn't even know there was a sport called skiing or snowboarding. I said, let's go snowboarding, because it sounded cool. I said, yes. So I booked the trip, and spend a few days, maybe a few weeks, visited every gear store, bought a couple snowboarding books, and went out snowboarding, went to Attitushmere Peak. First day on the slopes, I looked at the bunny hill. I didn't make it to the top. I'm like, that is ridiculous. I'm serious. My second day, I mustered the courage. I made it to the top of the bunny slope. I didn't make it down once without falling 50 times. The bunny slope's only about 100 yards long. The third day was a miracle. I made it down the bunny slope without falling. You don't understand. For me, that was success in and by itself. And it was enough, just enough, to kind of fuel me to keep me going. The next day, because I bought a 5-day pass, I don't do anything halfway. If I'm gonna fail, I'm gonna fail spectacularly. So the next day, first run, I made it down the bunny slope, and I got some courage. I went up to a little bigger hill, and I made it down. I'm like, oh, this is great. And I couldn't wait for the next day. And day 5, I don't know, somebody flipped a magical switch, and I made it to the top of the mountain. I don't remember coming down, but I made it to the bottom. Last run of the day, I got so excited, fell flat on my face, busted my lip. But you know what? I couldn't get enough of winter. I started backpacking, ice climbing, snowshoeing. My friends would go into bars, and just to get girls, they're like, hey, my ice climbing friend is Jamaican. And they would look at me like, what? So a friend of mine I met snowboarding and said to me, do you want to go climb Kilimanjaro? I'm like, what? That's a place that in Jamaica we banish our social pariahs to. Is there a place really called Kilimanjaro? Or are you pulling my leg? He says, no, it's real. I'm like, okay. So I climbed Kilimanjaro, made it to the summit. I couldn't wait to get off that mountain. I was like, I will never do this again. God, if you just help me get off this mountain, I promise you, I'll stay home and I'll go to church every Sunday. I was home for a couple of days. I'm like, that was not so bad. That was actually pretty cool. What else can I do? So I started reading a book, Into Thin Air. And I read that book. I'm like, you have to be kidding me. Mountaineering? What is that? And by the way, all these people are insane, suicidal, and there should be a law preventing these people from doing these things. Because I just couldn't get it. Why would you put yourself in that kind of a danger? So I said, well, I need to do something else because I want to go see the world and I want to do other things. I read a book by the name of Eiger Sanctions by John Krakauer, and it talks about climbing Mount McKinley. And before you know it, I was planning a trip to Mount McKinley. So this is me on Kilimanjaro. And then I planned a trip to Mount McKinley, and I was successful, and I got back, and that fueled me even more. I wanted to travel more just to see the world, but I like to get some exercise, so I wanted to travel in style and do some adventures. So from Mount McKinley, I decided I wanted to do something else. At the same time, I was reading a book called The 7 Summits by Dick Bass, who was the first guy to climb the 7 summits. I'm like, wow, what a cool way to see the world. There's only one problem. Everest is one of the 7 summits, and since I'm not insane and I'm not suicidal, I couldn't do the 7 summits. So I decided, oh, I'll do a couple of the other ones and forget Everest. Maybe no one will realize I didn't do Everest. And so I went to Russia, climbed Mount Elbrus, which is one of the 7 summits, and here we are. Then I went to Aconcagua in South America, and I got back from Aconcagua, and there's something about Into Thin Air that kept calling my name. And I read the book again, and I had the same reaction, and I'm like, okay. And then I read the book again. And that was my 3rd time reading the book, and I couldn't put it down. And you know when you have an idea in the back of your head that just kind of festering and you know it's there and you're trying to push it out because you know it's evil? That's kind of like my Everest. And in 2007, I really don't know what happened. I said, you know what, I'm gonna go climb Everest. And at the time, to be honest with you, I didn't even mean it because I was still sane at that time. And so, as 2007 progresses, I came to a crossroads. I'm like, you know what? I cannot ignore this. I have to climb Everest. I got to know what all the hoopla is all about. And so I decided I'd go climb Everest. So I'm going to take you through a quick journey of my travels through Everest. This is a little village. It's a trading post that's maybe 1,000 years old called Namche Bazaar at elevation 11,500 feet. And when you get there, I mean, it feels like you're on top of Everest, except you still got about 2 months worth of climbing and another 20,000 feet of elevation to go. And then these are some of the pictures and some of the things that I saw going to Everest. And I was hooked. I mean, I was the slowest hiker going to Everest Base Camp. I had 12 hours every day by which to get from one place to the next. That should take like 3 or 4 hours. And believe me, my first trip to Everest, I took about 6,000 pictures because I never stopped with my everything I saw, I was trying to enjoy and just take it in. And the best part about Everest was the kind of people that I met. I met some awesome people. This guy said Viesters, he climbed all the 8,000 meter peaks. Those are the 14 highest peaks in the world without oxygen. So if you don't know what that means, look it up, because that is not even human, that's more like superhuman. And then while I was at base camp, I met this guy that was knighted by the Queen of England, Sir Chris Bonington, that pioneered most of the routes going up Mount Everest and a lot of the hardest, most difficult climbing routes in the world, and lost all his friends in the process. And I don't mean he lost them, like left them somewhere. I mean, they died. So this is a look of Everest summit and the ice fall. I climbed it from the south side, and you get a closer look of what it's like to be climbing inside the ice fall itself. And as Ann said, you have to tie your tents down. So this is at about 24,000 feet on the Lhotse face of going up to Everest. And it's not a very hospitable place to be, but it's one that you'll never forget. So this is me early in the morning at about 28,500 feet going up Everest. And I remember it was pretty difficult climbing up. And so this is me on the summit. I was elated, and I was on the board of directors for the Boys and Girls Club, so I always tried to use my climbing to benefit different organizations, and the Boys and Girls Clubs was one of them that I did some benefit or fundraising for. And then I came back from Everest, and I had started my company. I worked for about 2 weeks, and then I realized that I needed a vacation. So my friend and I got on our mountain bikes, rode from Banff, 3,000 miles along the Continental Divide down to Mexico, and this is us along the way. And then came back, and work kind of got in the way, and it took me a while, but eventually, after a couple of tries, made it down to Antarctica. And what this picture doesn't really tell you is that diarrhea in minus 20 degrees, well, you get the picture. After Vincent Massif in Antarctica, I decided I wanted to finish the 7 summits. So I was going to Australia to climb Kosciuszko, which is the 7th summit. Kosciuszko is like walking up a ski slope, pretty easy. And my idea of adventure is not going to walk up a ski slope. So I called my friend in Australia. I said, hey, do you want to climb Mount Cook? He said, yeah, why not? So we went to New Zealand, and on the way, we hired a guide company, and they sent us this CV request. They said, well, we want to see what your climbing curriculum vitae looks like. We want to know what you've done. And we both kind of chuckled and sent the exact same email, not realizing it. Hey, we've climbed Everest. And they responded, we don't care. We want to see what you have climbed. We're like, how rude of these folks. And then we went down and climbed Mount Cook. And let me tell you, there are a lot of people who summited Mount Everest, that's not successful climbing Mount Cook. That's a story all by itself. There is no coincidence why Sir Edmund Hillary from New Zealand that trained on Mount Cook was the first person to summit Mount Everest. There is a correlation. It's the craziest mountain I've ever climbed. And then, I needed the break, so I climbed Kosciuszko right after. And then, because mountaineers are snobs, if it's an easy mountain, it doesn't count as a mountain. So, because Kosciuszko is so easy, they said it doesn't count of one of the 7 summits. So you have to climb a mountain in southern Indonesia and Papua New Guinea called Karsten's Pyramid. And so I decided to go climb Karsten's Pyramid, which is another crazy adventure, but that's what made these so fun. And this is me on Karsten's Pyramid holding up 8 fingers for finishing the 7 summits. So thank you.
Thank you, Rowan. Wow. So here's my takeaway from all that you just shared. The greatest adventures can start with the bunny slope, right? In fact, most adventures have to start with something like a bunny slope.
I think they all do.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So let's get the panelists to gather over here for a couple minutes, and let's just chat, okay? So I have a bunch of questions. I have so many questions. Y'all are so inspiring. It's so amazing. So I'm curious. I just start with a easy thing I wonder about. So when you get introduced and somebody asks you, what do you do? What do you say? What do you say, Ann? What do you do?
I coach field hockey at Trinity.
I had a feeling. How about you, Steve? What do you say?
I say I'm a writer, and I write a lot about the outdoors.
Rowan?
I say I'm an engineer.
An engineer?
Yes.
When does the 7 Summits come up?
I'm not a guy that loves to talk about himself, and so it's very difficult for me to bring that up and tell people about that. So it's easier for me to say I'm an engineer. If somebody asks about the 7 Summits, I'll share the information, but I don't usually bring that up ready.
Yeah. So I want just a slightly different direction. So when you're on Everest, or when you're on one of these other incredible peaks, and I'm also curious about when you're on the river or on rivers, are there times when your sense of dimension is very small, like you're not seeing the whole vastness, I'm imagining, where you're really seeing a very small section and your life and your focus is tiny and small? Is that possible?
Yeah, I will be guiding Mount Washington on Friday with Eastern Mountain Sports, and I have been colder and more concerned on Mount Washington than on some big mountains, because about a month ago a woman died up there, extreme weather. It just makes you realize how tiny you are, and you've got to be very conscious of the decisions you're making, and it doesn't matter whether it's 6,000 feet or 29,000 feet, you're tiny.
Mm-hmm.
So,
How about you, Steve? Do you share that? Is that?
Yeah, and I think you were talking about when we're out there, whether it's on a mountain or a river, do we tend to focus sometimes on the immediate as opposed to the whole?
Yes.
And for sure, I think, especially so on a river. If you're doing 400 miles of the Connecticut River, you're really looking at a mile of river at a time, and concentrating on what's there. You know, what are the trees over here, and oh, is that a moose just ahead down there, and all those things that make the trip fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. And the pink ladies. That's how you. That's how
And
you.
the pink
right.
ladies.
And the pink ladies.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So is it important? I want to ask you the same thing, Ron. But is it important? I mean, you know, just do you think so? I've got 29,000 feet to climb. But do you think I've got this next step to do? This next section to do? What's your perspective?
So for me, I never kind of look into the future very much. I try to prevent myself, and I try to be in the moment, because for me, what becomes very obvious is that when you look into the future, when you project, that's when mistakes starts to happen, because you're not aware of where you are and what you're doing at that moment, and that's when trouble typically happens. Mm-hmm. So I try to be in the moment, and I try to look around, see my surroundings, enjoy the environment, regardless of what it is, no matter how difficult it is. Mm-hmm. Right.
You share that?
I've shared, well, I think for me, and when I'm working with my team, I think if you look at some of the pictures, this huge mountain is insurmountable, and the sort of the takeaway I always try to share with people, if you look at that, most people aren't going to be crazy enough to try to do that, but everybody in their life has something as big as a mountain to climb that seems insurmountable. And how do you manage to do that? I mean, I think that saying of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, when we as a team are preparing, you know, we're playing competition against a team that has won a national championship, it's overwhelming. And so you take it one step at a time, and you've made that step, and then, wow, the ball's already in the attacking circle. And so looking at those little things as you go, before you know it, you could be on the top of the mountain, or your problem has been solved, or the game has been won. That's sort of the takeaway that I try to share with people.
Yeah, that's great. So what's the payoff? So when you do something like this, you know, you do these incredible journeys. What's the payoff for you, Ron?
See, for me, I'm doing the things that I love to do, and I love that feeling I get of success when I climb a mountain, and I love being in that environment. I love the vistas that I see, and I love that I get to experience a different culture, different environment. It's not just about the climbing for me. It's about traveling, experiencing the world, seeing different things, meeting different people, trying different foods, seeing different cultures, and what that's all about. So for me, the payoff is not just that I stood on the summit, but it's that experience and the sense of adventure and the sense of learning something new that I get from all of this.
The whole of it, all of it.
Exactly.
How about you, Steve? What's the payoff for you?
Actually, quite similar to what Rowan just said. The experience. I mean, for me, you know, when I finished the Connecticut River or did my section of the Appalachian Trail and all that, there is a feeling of accomplishment, for sure. But the thing I think that drives me is just being out there and doing it and seeing everything along the way.
And what's your payoff?
I don't consider myself a religious person. I don't go to church. I go outdoors is where I feel all of the things that both Rohan and Steve have shared. That for me is the biggest connection with a higher or greater power. It makes me realize that I'm a very tiny part of this universe, but that gives me something that is so big in my life that, you know, failing in 2004 was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with, but it made me get back up again and want to accomplish, but as much of it was because it gives me life, it makes me feel alive. And I really love now to be able to share my story with people. And I've met some wonderful people from doing things like this. That's sort of a real payoff, just sharing other people's stories and excitement, and to tell people that, you know, I work a normal job, I don't have a lot of money, but you can go do these things if you set your heart and soul on things. We're not sponsored, I didn't get any, but I never did it for those reasons.
And
So-
you know what,
Please,
to Ann's point, something that I didn't bring up, I think when you're connected with nature in that way, you start to see the bigger picture, because, and it's hard to explain. I don't know if Ann can explain it, but it's almost like you get a spiritual connection, having gone to these places and seeing the things that, very few people have seen, and you get that connection. And the reason I think I get that connection is because I'm able to spend that much time there. I don't have an option. So I'm committed for 12 days or a month or 2 months. And so you need to be one with your surroundings or else you're not going to last, so you need to be able to adapt. So I agree with Ann.
Did that surprise you, Rowan?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that
'Cause
sense of-
I never thought that I would get to that spiritual place with the outdoors.
Have you all shared that, felt that? Yes. So it's interesting. We had Cheryl Strait at the forum, and hers was a walk alone, right? A walk alone on the Pacific Coast Trail, a finding of self and self-awareness. So I didn't hear any of you all talking about going out for solitude or going out for meditation. It sounded like you all found people. You found connection. Was there something more than that? Was there self-awareness as part of this?
So I will tell you, it's for what I do. I don't know if this is similar to Ann. It's almost impossible to go through that without having self-awareness and find self-awareness, because you're spending, even though you might be with someone else, you're spending a lot of this time by yourself. So when you're walking during the days or you're in your tent at night, you're probably in the tent by yourself, and you're walking in solitary by yourself, So that's a lot of time you have with a lot of thoughts and a lot of emotions going through your head. So you become very reflective of everything going on in your life, not only at that moment, but in the past. You start to think about what you want your future to be, what kind of life you want to live, what's important to you. And so all of those thoughts are
Like a flood of
populating.
thoughts. You have to live with that. Eh?
And you have to find a way to control those emotions because you don't want to be overwhelmed by them.
Right.
When I went in 2006, my team gave me an iPod the day before I left. And so I turned to my grad assistant and I'm like, okay, what do I do with this thing? How do I put music on it? And I'm somebody who runs, and I've never run with headphones. I don't like to. I like to be aware. But because of the experience in 2004, so much time walking on your own, head down, I was like, maybe I'll try this. And the day after we had come back down to Advanced Base Camp, and I'd seen somebody die, we'd been on the summit, I had my headphones on, and U2 Beautiful Day came on, and I just lost it and burst into tears, and it kind of just triggered all kinds of emotion that I now hear certain music that was on my playlist there that has so much meaning because of you're walking 6 miles and it's taking you 12 hours to get to Advanced Base Camp, listening to stuff that you've never, like Johnny Cash. I was like, wow, this is awesome. I had such random music, but it was amazing. And it just, I don't know, that has a very sort of place in my heart too.
That heightened the emotions for you.
Yeah, it really did. Yeah, really did.
Steve, can you, reflection stories or?
Yeah, well, so many of these trips, much of the time on the Connecticut River, I was alone. A photographer would come join me for a day, but it would be every third day or so. So I was alone a lot. And some of these other things that I do, especially the 1 or 2 day things, I'm alone almost all the time. And so there is all this time for introspection. And you think, and just like Rowan was saying, you might start thinking about, things years ago, or start thinking about your career, what you're going to do. And I'll say another thing that's actually the flip side of this. If we're talking about being alone and introspection, for sure that's there. And I could tell stories. But the other side is I found, especially with my daughter, now over the years, I have done a lot of hiking with my daughter, and I've actually done a lot of canoeing with my son. And from when they were like 8 or 9 years, like my daughter and I would go hiking. And we'd be out there, we would just be hiking and hiking and hiking, and then a conversation would start. And we had some of the most meaningful conversations ever over these hikes, from the time she was 8 or 9 right through college. She went to the University of Vermont. We used to go hiking on the long trail if I came up to visit, you know. And, you know, I mean, she would talk about, you know, how college was going. We'd get really deep.
Oh.
And my son, we were on a canoe trip, remote northern Maine. We've been out there for 3 days. And he just starts talking to me one day. We're out, nobody around for miles. And he wants to talk about God. The kid's like 11 years old at the time, right? We ended up talking for like 2 hours. A conversation we never would have had in the house, at home. Too many things going on, you know, phone ringing and kids coming over to play and all that kind of stuff. So actually, I think the outdoor experience also can be a beautiful experience of conversation among people, as I found with my kids.
And connection. That's wonderful. Wonderful. So I want to shift us just a little bit. I'm sorry you all have to turn a little, but I'd love to. We have a couple of clips from the Connecticut Forum, and I'd like to just play the first one and then give you all a chance to maybe react a little bit. Can we run that clip? And you all get a chance to see this. That's apropos to where we. Any reactions to Cheryl? Can you relate?
Yeah, I was counting a lot.
Accounting?
When I listen to that clip, I think back to the time I climbed Mount McKinley, and they have a hill that's called Pig Hill, and they call it Pig Hill for a reason. It's going up to the summit ridge, and I remember being on that hill, what seems like eternity, and I would count from 1 to 99, and I would have to like always kind of restart. So I'd get to 40, and I think I was at 30 or 50, and I would forget, and then I'd go from 99, and I'd go backwards, and going from 99 backwards, or from 1 to 99, would take like 15 minutes because I had to concentrate so hard, and I was just trying to take one step at a time just to kind of pass the time. It was, I mean, very early in my mountaineering career. So when I listen to Cheryl, I think back to that time.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing? Do you have a greater appreciation for what our mind is capable of in terms of helping us through or getting in? I mean, it just seems like that's such an important part of all of this, is the mind versus the physical.
Absolutely, because now if I did that same thing, I wouldn't count. I deal with it differently. And the way I deal with it is I try to enjoy my surroundings or my environment. And I try to look up, I look around, I stop, I take a breath. I try never to be in such a rush that I miss the moment. And back then, very early, I was all about speed. You know, how fast could I go? But that's not always the right way.
Yeah. So when you make the decision, like when you say, so let's see, I want to climb 7 summits, I'm going to climb Everest, I'm going to take that 410-mile journey. Is that like a big? Is it like you have to work yourself up to that? Is there a real process? Is it calculating? You're an engineer, you know. Is there a lot of calculations, or is it just? I mean, you made it sound like, you know, I decided to climb Everest, and then I decided to do this one. What's that process of making that decision and then doing it?
I know for me, I told myself I was going to climb Everest, but I didn't believe it, and I didn't think it was going to happen. And a lot of things in my life happen that way. You know, I'll say I want to do something, although now it's not the same because.
But you made it sound impulsive, like, you know, I just went to the bunny slope and then I went and climbed Everest and then I went. I mean, you made it sound a little impulsive, but you're an engineer. I suspect there's a calculating part in there.
Yeah,
Rowan.
As an engineer,
Come on.
As an engineer, there's nothing you do in life that's not calculated.
Yes.
You know, you don't do a whole lot that's impulsive. Although I do have a lot of impulsiveness in my nature. But from the time I said, you know, because I read Into Thin Air maybe in 2003, and so that's been festering. And I read that book 3 times, and I'll tell you, I had nightmares about that book. Like I literally placed myself on the mountain. I could visualize everything that was happening in the book. And it took me a long time, and I could feel myself getting there that I want to do this, but I didn't know what the reasoning was. And so I resisted, and then 2007, I said, I'm going to do it, but I didn't believe it. And it took me a while before I actually convinced myself. And I still didn't believe it until I actually sent the guy a big check to say, hey, I'm committed.
I think it is. I think it is calculating. I ran Boston Marathon last year, and the year before I'd run Hartford, and I got a qualifying time. So you kind of, you know, I got a qualifying time in my age group, and you're kind of like, wow, that means I can run Boston. But then you're like, oh God, the training, when you go through. And then I remember somebody telling me that if I wanted to apply for Boston, the website was up and I had to do it this particular day. But I didn't tell anybody. So I went through this whole process of, if I sign up and I click and pay my money, as soon as I pay my money, I'm actually going to tell people. Because now once I tell people, now it's committing me, now I've got to do the training. And then now I've made it public, and now I can't let myself, so there is definitely a time where I'm thinking about things, but I don't, either I haven't paid for it, or I don't have the money, or I think once you either click, pay the money, or now you make a public,
you told someone.
I'm going to do it, and I felt very compelled after the bombing. That's what made me really say, now I have no choice, I'm running this marathon. And so I knew I'd had the time, but then when everything happened in April with the Boston bombing, I was compelled to go run it. And then I was just like, that's it, I'm going to run this marathon. And I think that's how I've made decisions about things.
It's arriving at it. It's a process. It's steps. It's a process.
But once I've paid and I've got the number, you know, and you can't wear the T-shirt unless you run the race. I have that kind of rule too.
Right.
So if you don't go run it, you can't wear the T-shirt.
Right.
It's
That's perfect. Steve, you want to weigh in on that, please?
Well, you know, in my case, I'm a writer, and I write about this stuff. I sit around and I read a lot, all about the outdoors. I've read all the famous things that you can think of, and they just give me ideas. And I'll say to myself, hey, if the current's interested, I'll canoe the Penobscot River in Maine this summer for a week. I mean, to me, it's exciting, and there's my next adventure.
They're writing you a check. As opposed to you writing a check, right?
Well, that's true. And again, now these are, for me to go canoeing on a wilderness river in Maine for a week is different than, Ann doing the Boston Marathon, which is a grueling thing for, say 3 hours, right?
Very difficult. You got to.
You like that, huh?
2 hours.
You like that?
But, you know,
Take 3.
in my case, I hop in the canoe and, you know, off I go and I paddle 10 miles. I feel wonderful. I see things. I set up my tent, make a nice dinner. I have a grand old time for a week. It's not climbing Mount Everest. It's not running the Boston Marathon.
Right.
So all of these little adventures that I do, and I guess little might even be the right word, you know, they're exciting for me, and I just keep cooking up the ideas, and you know, I have my lists. There's the rivers that I haven't done yet that I want to do, and trails. You know, I'd like to finish the long trail in Vermont. I've done a lot of it, but not all of it. More of the Appalachian Trail.
And they're not writing you checks for all of those.
No,
You're-
no, I mean, a lot of
that's
these.
that's from you. That's from you,
A lot of
Steve,
these I
right?
just
Yes.
do on my own.
Yes.
Yeah, but-
So thank you. So I want to play one more clip from this great Connecticut forum that we just had and give you all a chance to react, and then we'll take your questions. We want to do that. Can we see that second clip? So it's so great, so great. So I think that's such a great clip and point that Paul is making about failure. But he's also making this point, which I think is equally powerful, about persistence. 10 years. It took him 10 years to get these pictures of the narwhals. So he failed for 9 years, 364 and a half days. But he stayed at it. That persistence, it's just, so, reactions to that, the persistence side, the coming up against failure? Please, I know that's real
what I
for
do.
you.
That's my
Yes.
work. We lose and we try to win. And you keep losing and you learn more, and that's what you're trying to do every day. So you work a little bit harder.
We talk a lot about failures. It's good for us to be able to hit. We talk a lot about that, but I'm not sure, we really hold on to that. We really exercise that and value that. Steve, you're nodding.
Yeah, well, I have not had experiences analogous to that. I have on some of my adventures, I can think 3 or 4 days into the Connecticut River trip, where I had doubts. Am I going to fail? I was so tired. I think the 4th night out, I came into camp. I had paddled some difficult water during the day. I'd had to walk 4 or 5 miles to a phone. The cell phones didn't work up there then. And of course, this was 1991. And I made camp and everything else. And I realized I was just really exhausted. And I said, am I going to be worse in 2 days? And I just said, you can't fail. You've got to just maybe sleep later tomorrow, get some more rest, and just go at it again and don't fail. And I didn't. In fact, I think I just slept late the next morning, you know.
Did you surprise yourself that you could get past that fatigue?
I don't know if you'd say surprised or not. I was determined, you know. I just was not going to fail. If it meant having to take a day off and just sleep the whole day, then that's what I was going to do. But I wasn't going to pack up.
You weren't
and
going to
go home.
stop.
Yeah.
I think for me, 2004, on Everest, that the book High Crimes was written about. You know, I went with a group that things socially absolutely just imploded. People reacted and did things that just blew my mind, whether they were on a mountain or here at home. I didn't think human beings could even treat each other like that. Not summiting, not feeling great, losing a lot of weight because our food was terrible. I mean, the situation was pretty dire to the point, and I talk now with Michael Kodas and his wife Carolyn a lot. I think we probably had a level of almost post-traumatic stress from that expedition that we didn't realize. For me, that sort of failure of everything that I believed in humans was more powerful than not summiting the mountain. I needed to go back in 2006, and when I show slides, I show 2006, I don't show 2004. I needed to go back to find the goodness in people and to rewrite the experience that I had, to know that there are people that will lean down and give you a hand to pull you up rather than steal your oxygen and take your food.
Faith in people had
Yeah,
to be restored.
hugely.
Failure of people. Thank you, Ann. So let's take some of your questions. So I think, let's see, Rachel and Ryan back here, you have microphones, so if you have a question, how about right over here? And just raise your hand and they'll come around to you, okay?
Mr. Grant, I don't think I'm going to be tackling Everest or any of the other large mountains, so I'm thinking about locally. Do you have any resources that I could, maybe some suggestions for online resources to explore some of the Connecticut and regional areas, the hiking trails and things like that?
Yeah. Go to the Connecticut Forest and Park Association website for hiking stuff. Their website is ctwoodlands.org. That is a terrific organization. They're the people who created the Blue Trail system, which is the I-beam system of trails in Connecticut with a lot of other trails off of them. They are a tremendous resource. Their book called the Connecticut Walk Book, East and West editions, $25 each. Fantastic. If you are a hiker or you want to be a hiker, you want those two books. The Appalachian Mountain Club has a lot of stuff, amc.org. They have all kinds of stuff on rivers and hiking. They basically oversee the Appalachian Trail through New England, and they've got a whole series of books. Excellent book on canoeing the rivers and flatwater ponds and lakes of Connecticut, all over New England. There are, if you go to Eastern Mountain Sports or REI, one of those places, just go over to the book section. You're going to find a ton of stuff on Connecticut. You know, if you want to wait another year or so, I'm writing a book on my guide to the Connecticut outdoors. You can order it now.
Where is that, by the way? Where is that, the the trail that you said, what's it called, the Bold Wilderness?
Oh, the Bold Coast Trail.
Bold Coast.
in
Where
Maine.
is that in Maine?
It's way down East Maine. It's about an 8-hour drive from here, and that's why it's so remote. Wonderful trail if you don't mind driving all the way up there.
Yeah.
It's as wild as the eastern coastline gets,
Yep.
and beautiful.
Yep.
Half
Oh.
the spruce forest and ocean.
Other questions? So I see a hand over here. This is your chance, folks. Don't hold back.
Hi, I was curious if each of you could tell me where you went to college and if you had any mentors.
Rowan, you want to start? Where'd you go to college?
I went to university in Connecticut, and I had one pseudo mentor. That's when I switched to my current career. When I was in college, I got a summer internship job at the Hartford Public Works, and a guy by the name of Hazard Blinn says, "What are you doing studying mechanical engineering? You should be a civil engineer." And I went back to school the next September and switched my major, and here I am.
University of Connecticut. How about you, Steve?
University of Connecticut. And I don't know that I could say I had a mentor for what I do. I've had a couple of good influences. An early editor of mine, Bob Boone, he liked to hike and canoe, and we used to do that when I was in my 20s. And just a good influence. We went and did Mount Katahdin together. But mostly, since I was a kid, I liked the outdoors. My parents used to take me on picnics, and we went camping and stuff. And it just carried on, and I just kept reading more about it and doing more. And here I am.
Mm-hmm. Ann, where'd you go to school?
When I was 11, a teacher at a middle school in England where I grew up took us on a 2-week hiking, camping, mountaineering to the Lake District in Britain. It poured with rain. We got soaked. There was water running through the middle of our tent. It was boys and girls together. There was no distinction because you were a boy or a girl. You got thrown in. I loved it. I was soaked for 2 weeks. I went to a PE college in England, Chelsea College, and I just knew from 11 years old, this is a pretty cool thing, and I loved sports. And I was like, how can I make my living in sports? And it was like, be a PE teacher. So my undergrad was in England. I taught 3 years of PE there, and then I came over here and I went to grad school at UMass Amherst. And I've been coaching, teaching, and been part of the outdoors ever since. And that experience when I was 11, I think, was a really formative experience for me.
Nice, thank you. So we have a couple of, I see back here, I'm going to just, back there, right here, and right over here. Yeah.
Hi, I think all three of you are very inspiring, and it's great to hear these stories. I'm curious to know, when you go on these long trips for 2 months or 5 weeks or whatever, what is the one thing you dream of when you get back to your home? Is it ice cream or pizza or TV?
That's a great question.
So this may sound a little odd, but for me, when I got home, it was about sitting on the toilet, walking barefooted in my house, walking in shorts. It was just, it's literally simple things. It wasn't anything grand. It was literally just those little things that I really enjoyed coming back to.
How about you, Ann?
Beer, pizza, ice cream, shower. No, and it is amazing to, a shower obviously is amazing. But to walk on flat ground is an incredible thing because you've been walking for 5+ weeks on rubble, and it's coming back to Kathmandu or to a city and walking on the sidewalk in a pair of Tevas or flip-flops. That was pretty amazing.
Wow. But yeah. Now, Steve, we know you take everything with you, so there's nothing that you could want when you come back because we saw the load you take. But is there something, Steve?
Yeah. Well, when Michael and I circumnavigated Long Island Sound, we were in our kayaks every day and paddling all day long. Any water splashes in, it's the ocean. And by the end of that trip, both of us, all we wanted was a day where our feet would stay dry all day. Yeah. Our feet were always soaking wet, And so that was fun. And then my son and I rafted the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon one year. And, so we're out 9 days on the river and rapids and all that stuff. And the water's really silty, And, we just had silt everywhere and no showers, obviously. And so when we finished that trip, all we wanted to do was take a shower and really take 5 showers to get the silt out of our scalps and everything.
Right. Showers is a theme here, right? Showers.
The theme.
Beer and pizza,
the
showers.
The theme is showing up there.
Yes, sir. You had a question. Right behind you. He's coming up.
For Rowan and then maybe for Ann. Rowan, how many people in the world are in your club of having hike the 7 highest peaks? And then also, what's it like for climbing without oxygen? How many people can do that?
So how many people, 7 summits, and climb it without oxygen? That's great. And I think then
So-
there's a question here.
I know there are about 350 people in the world that have done some variation of the 7 summits. There's only about, it may be over 100 now, but there's just about 100 that have done these 7 summits, which includes Karsten's Pyramid in Papua New Guinea. And let's see, how many people have done the 14 8,000 meter peaks without oxygen? I could probably count them on one hand.
Yeah.
It was first done by Reinhold Messner. It's since been done by a few others, but last I knew, maybe 2-3 years ago, there are maybe 6 or 7 people that have done that. And I will say this, the mortality rate of people attempting that is extremely high. So for every 3 or 4 people that attempts it, only 1 makes it, and the others are not around to tell the tale. So,
And the thing about oxygen, you wear oxygen. I mean, a lot of people ask me, how did it feel? Did you suddenly be like, oh, great, I can now do this? And it's more about oxygenating the blood to get oxygen to your extremities to prevent frostbite, and then also to try to oxygenate your brain for better decision making. A lot of guided trips, there's a lot of controversy because some guides will climb quite high without oxygen because of the expense, but it's the decision making process and then the frostbite. And then on top of that, you need to be a certain type of Ed Vistas human being who has a VO2 max, like the ability to take in 4 liters of oxygen anyway. There are a lot of people that, I was on the summit for 50 minutes without any oxygen. We had an amazing day. So you can breathe. It's a misnomer. You can breathe, but you're greatly increasing the chances of frostbite.
And how long did it take for you to feel that?
I mean, I was fine on the summit, but coming down, oxygen back on, and by that time, most of us, it's running out anyway. But if you ran into a problem or bad weather, then now you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I think there was a question over here. Are there any other questions? I just want to make sure. And so let's see. We're going to go right there, and then also right next to you, and then we'll go here, and then in the back, and you'll have the last word.
Phil, indulge me one Everest geek question for Anne, and then a question for all 3 of you. And the geek question for Anne is, going up the North Face in the second step, I take it you think Mallory and Irvin, no way they made it.
Yeah, okay.
And then the second question is for all 3 of you is, what's the next challenge?
So did Mallory and Irvin make it, do you think, and what's the next challenge? Thank you. It's great.
Conrad Anker, there was an expedition with Conrad, and I think at the Connecticut Science Center, that film was, it was an amazing film with a British climber, a great rock climber. They took the ladder down off the second summit and actually rock climbed it. And it's about a 5'9" rock climb, which, back in 1924, that would have been, in the equipment that they had, it was challenging for Anker, who is in the same class as an Ed Vistas. And so, if he did fall, I think it was a big chance that it was from there. Romantically, it would be nice to think maybe he fell on his way down. But, I don't know, so.
So we're going to save that what's next question. I want to end with that, actually. If you don't mind, we'll save that. So there was another question here, I think. And then we're going to let you have the last word in the back there. Yeah?
It's a more general question, but do you feel like our cultural attitude is changing to be more accepting and maybe more appreciative of these non-conventional pursuits? And what I mean by that is, say if I come to my employer and say, hey, I want to take 2 months off to do Mount Everest. Do you think people say, well, that's not a bad idea? Maybe Steve, you can tell us about the reactions that your readers had to the adventures that you did on Connecticut.
Yeah. Well, my stuff is really, as I said earlier, is many people can do the things I'm doing, you know, to canoe the whole Connecticut River. You know, it really involves, do you have the time to do it? Do you have the 4 or 5 weeks to do that? Can you physically do it? Most people in reasonably good shape can do it if they want to, you know. Now, the public, in the case of to get to your question, in the case of the Connecticut River trip, readers went crazy over it. It was a hugely popular series in the Current. Maybe the single most popular thing I ever wrote. So there's an audience for this kind of thing as a journalist. And your question about whether society is now more receptive to the kind of things that Ann and Rowan have done, I don't know if I have a good handle on that. I would guess a little more
Well, let's find out. Rowan, if one of your employees came to you and said, I want to take a couple months off and climb Everest.
So we just redid our employee handbook.
Yes.
And I actually put something in there that's called a PIDLOA. It's called.
What's it called?
It's called a PIDLOA, P-I-D-L-O-A. It's called a personal development leave. So you could take up to 3 months.
Wow.
And depending on your performance and how well you do with the company, could be paid. And it needs to be, you have to do something. You can't just go home and stay home. You can't go babysit.
Yeah.
I mean, it needs to be something that's going to make you a better person. It needs to involve some act of charity. But it's meant for exactly something like this.
Wow.
So if somebody wants to go explore Antarctica, wants to climb Everest, whatever it is they want to do, they have the luxury of doing that. So they you know, there are requirements around. They have to be with the company for 5 years, because if they're going to get paid, then
Right.
You know, want to incentivize.
But that's wonderful
Right.
to bring that into your company, make that a company value.
Well,
That's great.
I quit my job to go climb Everest. You know, I went to the CFO and I said, I want to take 2 months off to climb Everest. And she said, it's not my decision, it's the president's decision. And I went to the president and I said, I'd like to go climb Everest. He said, yes. I said, oh, great. And he celebrated with me. And that same night, the CFO went to him and said, you can't allow that. And he left me a voicemail that says, you can. And I sent him my resignation. And that was in 2009 when the economy was doing this. But, you know, at the time, I just felt like there was a call. And I felt like I needed to do it at that time. And I needed to start my company at that time. And hopefully it will work out. So far it has.
It's very admirable, very. Back in the back, yes.
Sure. I'm sorry, I hope you didn't address this because we didn't come in at the beginning, but there's been a lot of controversy about the expeditions to Everest because of how difficult it is and the commercialism, and yet many of these, Nepal is not a rich country, and so it actually benefits from it. Can you speak to that balance between making sure that people are prepared and the commercialism, and yet also making sure everyone's safe, and yet how does it affect the country?
You want to take that?
I think climbing any mountain is not safe. So making it safe, it's never going to be safe. And I think last year the tragedy, you know, the avalanche that took more people in one day than in history on Everest is a testament to that. I think a lot of the companies now, there's a greater awareness of how the employees that are Sherpa, how those companies treat those Sherpa and their family. And I think the better companies have the Sherpas working as year-round employees, and their families are getting health insurance and education. There are a lot of companies, and if you try to go on the cheap, contract Sherpas, paid minimally. That's what occurred on ours, where it was actually other Sherpas stealing equipment to sell it on the black market in Kathmandu because they just weren't making very much money, and they're being surrounded by what seems like a huge amount of Western wealth. But without, you know, the trekking industry and climbing industry, you're right, it's the second biggest income in Nepal is tourism, and that's through trekking and mountaineering. And so when the Maoist government and the problems with the Maoists occurred, a lot of the trekking industry went away, and that hurt the people of Nepal hugely, because especially up the Kumbu Valley, a lot of the tea houses and the small little shops were not getting the tourist industry, which is now, has returned. But you're right. I think a lot of committed Western companies have put a lot of money into schools, hospitals, education, and supporting families to help the Sherpa families and the people up the Kumbu Valley. But it's tough just because of the infrastructure of Nepal. I think it's a very complicated situation.
Thank you, ma'am. So last question, I'm gonna take from here. I'm gonna give you a choice, actually. So you can either tell us what's next for you, or you can tell us what advice you would give your 21-year-old self. Take either one of those, but only one. Go ahead, Ron.
Ooh, what advice would I give my 21-year-old self? I think I'm going to take what's next. So
Yep.
I have a kid that's on the way any day now, so that's certainly next.
Yes.
In terms of adventure, Amelia is going to set the stage for that. But what I would like to do is do some climbing in the Alps, the Eiger, the Matterhorn, and Mont Blanc. Hopefully do an Ironman somewhere along the line, and then followed up by doing a trek to the South Pole.
Why not?
And then hopefully I could get K2 in there sometime, and then finished up with the North Pole for the Grand Slam.
Well, get a little more ambitious next time you get that question, okay? Steve, what's either question? 21-year-old self or what's next?
Yeah, well, I'll do what's next. Well, I'd like to, I've been to almost all of the famous national parks in the country, but I have not hiked in Grand Tetons National Park, and I'd like to go there this summer and just hike for a week. And I'm working on that book on the outdoors, and there's a lot of rivers and lakes and trails in Connecticut I need to revisit so that I have up-to-date information. So I'll be bopping all over the state doing this here and that there.
And when is that book coming out again, Steve?
My guess is it'll be a couple of years.
You said a year just a few minutes ago. Anne, which question do you want to take?
I guess what's next?
What's next?
So last summer, I was taking part in. I'm a member of the American Mountain Guides Association. I've done my rock instructor's course. I've done that exam. So last year in the Grand Tetons, I was doing my Alpine Guides course, and on day 2 of the course, post-hold into soft spring snow, fell downhill with my leg caught in the hole, and I tore my MCL. I was stuck in the hole, couldn't get back out, and I've been really fortunate to not ever be seriously injured in my life. Never had a knee injury, so I couldn't complete that course. I had to withdraw from that course, which was really hard for me. And so it's been about 8 months now of, last week I skied every day, I hiked every day. I'm going to guide Mount Washington on Friday. I'm skinning, so I'm getting back, and so this June I'll go back to the Tetons. My goal is to complete that course, because I don't like things undone.
Yes.
But I'm now very conscious of being a little bit of a gimp, which is frustrating. But yeah, I'm around 18 to 21-year-old athletes, and that's where I believe I am in my heart. So as long as I can continue that, that's my next, is to finish that course.
Get busy, all right? Really, stop resting on your laurels here, right? Yeah. Okay, so I just want to say thank you all. It's been wonderful listening to you and being inspired by you and connected to the outdoors with you. And thank you all for being here for this. I hope it was fun for you all. We went over a little bit, but I think it's well worth it. You with me on that? So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Hartford Public Library. Thank you all.